Garth Brooks. We've all heard of him. The man made some noise in the 90s. I was 3 years old when his first NBC special came out, and I was hooked. My dad recorded it, and that tape was on repeat in this household. I mean, look at this kid. Isn't that just the image of pure innocence and joy? Jealous? And yes, I still have the tape. It still plays. Not very well. Yes, he made an impression on me, and why wouldn't he? I mean, just look at this concert. He comes out of the floor and all hell breaks loose. He's smashing guitars, he's swinging off the stage, flinging water around like a madman. Yes, this video is about the Chris Gaines thing. I'm building up to it, just bear with me. I remember seeing a clip from one of his specials where he was being interviewed on England, and the comment was made to him.
There seems to be some dispute as to whether you're really rock or country.
Well, that's because combined with this high-energy rock concert, where the stage would literally be on fire, was this rock and roll style of country music, which at the time was a very new kind of a thing. Back then, you either loved it or you hated it, and I've met some haters in my day. His music blended everything from Queen to Kiss to James Taylor, Billy Joel, Aerosmith, and then he put it in this George Strait, Merle Haggard kind of container. Hope I'm making sense. Basically, he took all these different styles of music and just kind of put them in the ring and let them fight it out. And in fact, he even covered an Aerosmith song called The Fever, and he just changed the words around. Yeah, he Weird Al'd Aerosmith. Sort of. So when 1999 rolled around and this whole Chris Gaines project came about, personally, I wasn't very surprised just because of what the guy had already done, but it ended up confusing a lot of people, so let's take a look at this thing. So, for those who don't know, who is Chris Gaines? What's the story? What's the scoop? Well, he's a fictitious rock legend that Garth was supposed to play in a movie called The Lamb, a suspense thriller that was never made. And the idea behind releasing this album was to get the audience familiar with this guy's music before the movie comes out. And already eyebrows are raised like, why would Garth do this to begin with? Well, let's back it up a few years. Garth had been mentioning in interviews dating all the way back to 1989 that he'd like to give acting a shot, but not in a way that you would think.
Yeah, I told them if they ever need somebody to be a bad guy, which is weird, I'd love to be a bad guy.
No, you don't want to be a bad guy, no. I mean, you look like a good guy, you know?
Okay, I guess. I'd rather kill somebody.
Oh, you are?
So the guy's looking to do more villainous roles, or at least play a character that audiences wouldn't expect him to.
I don't want to be in a movie if I can't act like Jack Nicholson, you know? I don't want to be in a movie.
He can't sing like Garth.
If I do movies, I would like to do that.
And what's weird about this, he allegedly turned down roles in Saving Private Ryan and Twister. I don't know if that's true or not, because the internet can lie sometimes. But regardless, here we are. Garth has an opportunity to take on a very different type of project, and while doing this, many people believed he was trying to reinvent himself and stray away from country music. However, this whole Chris Gaines thing wasn't even Garth's idea. Apparently, it was Paramount Pictures that conceived the project, and a guy named Kenneth Babyface Edmonds who approached Garth to come on board. And the journey the project would take to get from start to finish would be one hell of a roller coaster, to say the least. The album drops and a bunch of TV specials come out in support of the project, and the first special I want to talk about was the tamest of them all. It was a live concert special on NBC called Garth Brooks and the Life of Chris Gaines. And I want to say before we jump in here that this special and the album itself, well, that was pretty much all the exposure I had to this back then. I hadn't seen the whole VH1 special until just recently, and wow, we'll talk about that one a little bit later. It's wild. But this live concert special was, I thought, a perfect way to introduce this whole thing, because Garth just comes dressed out in black, takes his hat off, and he just performs the songs as himself. You know, nothing too flashy or in your face. It's just the same dude that people have connected with for the last decade. And in between songs, Garth made it very clear that it was just a fictional character that he was playing in a movie, whether it be off stage in an interview setting or on stage in front of the audience. He gave some of the character's backstory and talked about some of the challenges that he had playing the character. By the end of it, things were pretty clear. I mean, there was that one thing that he said that was just weird.
The Chris Gaines thing, though, the closer you look and the more you find out, you realize Chris Gaines is Garth Brooks.
And I would just argue that he's just implying that the music between him and Chris really isn't all that different. But despite that little weird comment there, we're off to a pretty solid start. And in my opinion, if they had left it there and just let the movie speak for itself when it comes out, things may have panned out a little bit differently with this project. But we're just getting started. Oh, here's where the plot thickens and things get weird, because things were taking a giant leap further when VH1's Behind the Life of Chris Gaines hit the airwaves, and instead of Garth presenting this project as a fictional character that he's going to be playing in a movie, this thing attempts to solidify Chris Gaines as a real-life person. It even has Billy Joel, Don Was, and Maria Costa playing themselves. It's like a legitimate episode of Behind the Music, and it's more or less labeled as a parody of the show, and it details everything about Chris's life from childhood all the way to the present day. So, bearing all in mind that this is all fiction, here's the short version of Chris's life. Chris Gaines was born in Brisbane, Australia in 1967, and him and his family moved to LA when he was 5 years old. His dad wanted him to follow in the family footsteps as an Olympic swimmer, but by his teenage years, Chris had developed a passion for music, which drove him and his dad apart. In 1986, Chris dropped out of high school and formed the band Crush with his best friend Tommy, who had died in a plane crash right after the band took off into superstardom. And then his dad was diagnosed with cancer in 1987 and then passed away 3 years later after Chris's solo career took off, and he was never able to mend the relationship with his dad. And then a few years later, after a long, exhausting recording session, Chris fell asleep behind the wheel and was in a near fatal car accident. His body was horribly busted and his face was ripped apart, and several plastic surgeries were done to his face. And he hid from the public for several years after that because he didn't want the public to see what he looked like. And he was also addicted to communicating with other women, as the special puts it, which he also went to therapy for because it was driving him and his girlfriend, Maria Costa, apart. But therapy steered him back on track, and him and Maria were able to mend the relationship, and he eventually did venture back out into the public eye. Which brings us to 1999 when Chris released this album, the only Chris Gaines album that exists in reality. And there's so much that I didn't even bring up, like the affair with his manipulative manager, his house burning down in a wildfire, his record company sabotaging one of his albums, the list goes on. And remember what Garth said in that NBC special?
Chris Gaines is Garth Brooks.
Well, there's a couple things that Chris Gaines and Garth Brooks have in common. Like, Garth was on the football team in high school and originally thought he would have a career in athletics. And Chris's dad was pressuring him to be an Olympic swimmer. So both of their childhoods have their roots in athletics, but they both ended up playing music as a career. Also, they both struggled with their record labels. During an interview with Charlie Rose, Garth explained that he didn't feel the label supported his album Fresh Horses in 1995. And for Chris, the same thing happened in 96 with his album Triangle. Also, for the movie, this young attractive actor named James Cooley, well, he was supposed to play Chris up until the car accident.
Because we got this young kid to play him from 1986 to 1992. Happens to be the same young kid that played young Brad Pitt in 7 Years of Tibet.
Garth was set to play him after the car accident.
That must have been a hell of a car ride.
Oh, I'm sure Garth's ego was boosted when he was cast to play Brad Pitt after a bad car wreck. Except I have a little problem here. In preparation for this video, I watched 7 Years in Tibet, and well, what? Brad Pitt's character, at his youngest in the movie, is played by Brad Pitt. Garth, what are you talking about? James Cooley's name doesn't even show up in the credits, nor does it show up on the IMDb page for the movie. Is there some secret lore here that I'm not aware of? A deleted scene? Am I just stupid and missed James completely? Somebody just send help. And to make things more confusing, when Garth hosted SNL in 99, Chris Gaines was the musical performer. Alright, so now this fictional character is performing on SNL. Yeah, that won't confuse anybody. They even have Garth introducing him before the song, and it seamlessly transitions into the performance where Garth is completely dressed up as Chris. And they pull this off with a pre-recorded intro from Garth, along with a stunt double for Garth in the next shot. I feel so manipulated. Then they turn around and completely break the illusion after the song. Chris walks off stage to his dressing room, and a very weird sketch where Chris Kattan is playing Mango happens. It's all very bizarre. The sketch is basically a callback to the first time Garth was on SNL, and he falls in love with Mango, and Mango rejects him. This time around, Mango falls in love with Chris Gaines, only for Garth to reveal that he is Chris Gaines. This is just so weird.
Mango! Mango!
Would you shut up already?
Let's just all be grateful that if Garth was gonna have an alter ego, it was Chris Gaines and not freaking Coco.
And before I knew it, I was leaving in the public park, pleasing factory workers for money.
God. So yeah, that's the saga in a nutshell, but what about the album itself? Well, it's pretty great, I'm not gonna lie. And in fact, many Garth fans consider it their favorite album of him. Even Garth's wife Trisha Yearwood says it's her favorite Garth album. I don't think I can pick any one of his albums as my favorite. Okay, it's in pieces, but this one ranks pretty high for me. Garth said in that Charlie Rose interview that I mentioned earlier that what he hopes people remember the most from this project is the music. While it's hard to forget the wild ride that it took us all on, I think it's done that, at least for people who are on board with it. Who knows, maybe a new generation will have a chance to discover it, and maybe the music will have a new chance to stand on its own without all this craziness surrounding it. And I think it will, because I hear there's a vinyl release planned for the future with some previously unheard tracks, and I'm glad that's happening because at the time of recording this, the album can only be found on places like eBay because it's not currently in print or streaming on Amazon. So I'm definitely looking forward to hearing more that didn't make the cut. So overall, I really like this project, and I just wish it had come full circle. And I think the biggest reason it failed was because it was either ahead of its time or just too darn elaborate for its own good. But still, I applaud Garth for taking this on. It was a brave move on his part to accept this project in the first place, and while he definitely took his fair share of punches in the gut for doing it.
Would you revisit the Chris Gaines concept?
Yeah, when my ribs heal up from the last one, yeah, I got the kicked out of me for doing that.
But like I said, hopefully someday it gets a chance to live again in the future. And that's all I have for you this time around. If you like what you saw here, consider liking and subscribing, all the things, and I'll see you in the next video. Okay, bye.